Buonasera a tutti. Data l'ora verrebbe da dire
Good evening, everyone. It should actually be a good night since it's late, but I think that the reason why we're here tonight, it's a good reason to stay up late. Because it's human sympathy that makes me be here tonight. A human sympathy that we all felt last year at the beginning of December when we saw those dramatic and beautiful images of a square, Maidan Square in Kyiv. Hundreds of thousands of people at the square peacefully in order to reaffirm the dignity of the young people that were the object of violence. Ever since then, many things happened. History took a dramatic course, and in some cases even tragic course. But that bit of sympathy and interest in the life of our Ukraine brothers is still there. We want to understand. We want to realize and know more about the secret and the reason why it started. Because that the beginning of it contained a promise of good, the realism of hope, as the title of our conference. And it's a very great conference opportunity because we will have the opportunity to listen to one of the protagonists of those events, Constantin Sigov. And we share our passion for life together with him, because existence is a value to protect and to develop to him. So I'd like to talk with him. I have a lot of questions for him, but don't despair. It won't last too long. So I'd like to ask Sigov to start by introducing himself, telling us about his life, his personal life, his professional history, and why he found himself one day in one of those ends of the world, a place that became a crossroads from which contemporary history passed and occurred out of people's initiatives, and he's one of those people. So if you'd like to tell us something about yourself and show us something about yourself, because it's brought here is a small video that will take us back to a couple of months when it all started. Thank you for your hospitality. In these such difficult times for Ukraine, so it's an honor for me to go and talk about my country. I want to be sincere and open and straightforward, but a philosopher needs to start about his biography by starting from the criticisms about postmodernism. The idea is that the story of the person starts from himself. My story encounters also the story of my teachers. I was born in Kiev in 1962, and they called me Constantin. My name contains a lot of history. My parents loved me and raised me with a lot of love together with my brother. My house were always open for friends, and there was a lot of hospitality towards of those people who came to study to Kyiv from all of the other cities of Ukraine. At our home, people used to find that familiar affection, and to many people our place had become their place. In my father, many found that maternal principle that they were looking for, and this made me analyze more and think about who that person was. My father, he wasn't a dissident, but he was a friend of Nekrasov's and of other dissidents. It was very far from the Soviet ideology, since my parents were teachers of science at university. They were baptized in 1929 after they were born, and during our childhood we weren't baptized. We found Christ together with my wife, Irina, and we were baptized together with my son, Alexei, in 1989. The day in which the Berlin Wall went down, when our friend visited for the first time the former Soviet Union. Overcoming this distance that lies between my life and the church life, well, we were helped by a Muscovite poet's stepmother, Olga Chedakova. She showed us how Athens and Jerusalem were actually so close to us. I studied at Kiev's School of Philosophy, and I was lucky enough to have as a scientific guide a philosopher by Krimsky. To him, his place, the place where he felt at home, was Santa Sofia's Cathedral in Kiev. And in a very intimate and mysterious way, he introduced me to all of those saints that were looking at me from the mosaics of the 11th century. So this relationship that lies between the Kiev mosaics and Ravenna mosaics made me feel much closer to Italy ever since then. But back then, borders were closed and it wasn't possible to come here in Italy from there. But in the era of transparency, the post-Soviet era, I got to know the chance of a fight for renewal, perestroika, and I experienced perestroika. I went right there at the center of it. I studied in Moscow at the School of Philosophy. I went to Moscow 2 months per year just to take my exams. And then I invited the best authors in Moscow to publish new books in the Philosophy Review of Kyiv. And I was part of the committee of this review. And in this way we met Olga Sedakova's husband, Sergei Averentsev, the great protagonist of the Christian culture. Afterwards, they published his opera Omnia. And when we worked on the first volume of this book, something very important happened to me. Thank God. I had the opportunity to meet my spiritual father, who's here with us today, Ambrosi, and he managed to baptize my father in 1999. And just think that in one of the buildings of our publisher's house, also one of my old philosophy teachers was baptized. So that generation that raised us was raised in their turn by the church, as if they were the youngest generation compared to us. At the middle of the 90s, together with Sedakova, we went to meetings and we had lunch with Pope John Paul II. During those years, we were talking a lot about his possible pilgrimage that he wanted to do in Ukraine and Russia. And you know how important his visit was to us, to our society, and to the whole European community. His visit to Kiev, it was very important to all of Ukraine. And you also know that he didn't get the chance to visit Russia instead. He wanted very bad to go to Russia. He couldn't actually name explicitly the people that didn't want him to go there, to the east. And that was very hard for him. Now it's much easier to talk about those people that wanted to isolate Russia. But of course, this doesn't ease our pain. It's not just about a personal history, personal story. I think that during his young years, he took a part in the Molotov Pact, where Poland was split up in parts and disappeared from the maps. And then when Joseph Ratzinger came, he knew very well how totalitarianism totalitarianisms were important in Europe. Yesterday, in Paris, they celebrated 70 years anniversary of Paris liberation. My parents remembered Kiev liberation from Germany. You will be able to remember better than me Italy's liberation and how the Gasparist generation built post-totalitarian Europe, Spain liberation from Franco, and the tragedy of Budapest's liberation in 1956, and then Prague in 1968, and Poland of Solidarność. And how all of the ex-Soviet Union got out of isolationism. In Ukraine, this process never ended. After Ukraine independence in 1991, for 23 years, without ups and downs, 3 generations were educated in order to look at the reality and be open to reality. And we took part in 1993 in the Secession War. Our sons never took part in armed conflicts. We understood. Both the old generation, our generation, and our sons' generation, that this is a great war, the liberation of all of the Europe. And nowadays we know that this challenge goes on. After some illusions that everything would set even without us, without our responsibility, now we know that each and every one of us is responsible and needs to take part in what the old generation also did, John Paul II's generation. I beg you, I'm sorry, I talked about my teachers, my professors. It's a small story from my personal dad to the Universal Catholic Pope and Dad. So, last year, at the beginning of December, he was one of the protagonists of the Maidan events. Today, I visited the exhibition dedicated to Peggy. Here at the meeting, in one of the rooms, there is a sentence written on a wall, and right after reading it, I thought about you and Filonenko. I did it right away. And I'm wondering if there's something similar that he recognizes comparing to his experience. Ever since my childhood, I knew a simple thing. We needed to start the world revolution by a revolution in ourselves. Socialists at the end, during all of the 20th century, feels the need of change, but identifies the origin of change in himself. So that's why I want to ask you, did you experience something similar during this time?
Thank God. I believe that Ukrainians are more than just me and Filonenko. And actually, we are just parts of a bigger ocean. And I am very happy that his book is entitled The Ocean of Mystery. And I am very glad that this book could be done what in Kiev hasn't happened. Anna Motola and Carmenali could ask Filonenko everything, and this is just possible thanks to a friendship, a very beautiful friendship. In order that you can believe me on the fact that we are only parts of a bigger ocean, well, maybe it would make sense showing a short video that was realized. So we're gonna talk about some events that took place in Kiev.
Это приглашение ко всем в Киев. Посетите.
It's an invitation for everybody to come to Kiev. saying this, it is important that you become aware of something very important that connects what's happening right now in Rimini to what happened there in Kiev. In November, December, and in the beginning of January, in Maidan, there was a big reunion of work and of volunteers. This group of volunteers, of a volunteer group, was difficult to be imagined in a space, in a place in the Soviet world. You might remember how Hannah Arendt says that the task of totalitarianism is to split out society, to divide it into parts so that people could be divided and cannot do anything together. And the most beautiful thing, the most joyful thing in our country that happened at the beginning of the 21st century, a positive movement, has been this volunteer group. That is to say, a help to all the people that, to the post-Soviet Union, were poor, those people who had suffered the most the consequences of the events. And on Maidan, as soon as the people saw the repression starting, they started a movement so to rebuild in a human way life in Maidan. It was winter, it was cold, it was December, so people had with them food, clothes, medicines, and it all was done very joyfully. And there was starting a propaganda, a false information, and people would say, we're not here for money. People were bringing money so to support this solidarity movement and the joy to serve the others was a movement of communion that was represented by food or drinks that were offered by people with a beautiful face, the most beautiful faces in our country. And this helped me because I didn't see any esotism in that. I can say that the volunteers that are working here are doing right the same thing that our volunteers in Kiev were doing. They have the same spirit, they are moved by a passion, a solidarity and love. And it is beautiful that here in Rimini you can have this spirit, and you can do that during a whole week, and you prepare it during months. In Kiev there was a week, then on December the 1st my wife and my children and I were together with other million people of Kiev in the square when we decided that we wouldn't abandon Maidan. Then on December the 8th, which is when we remember the Saint Pope Clemente Romano, and it was Sunday, and hundreds of thousands of people were celebrating this day. He was a saint the protector of Russia, and Russia was baptized by the remains of his body, we also have a mosaico that represents Pope Clemente with other great figures of church. Well, that was the first week, which was very similar to the week that we're having here in the meeting. Then difficult times came, hard times. And I have to be honest that the most impressive thing is that this volunteer movement is still alive. And we will talk about that later. It is the thread that connects the end of 2013 and the summer of 2014. It is not fair to say that these two periods are divided by a gap. And now I want to say another important thing. Actually, us together with the people who love Peggy, I must say that we were inspired by Peggy's example. He was like a model to us as a writer or as an editor. I was teaching at the Paris University. I've been there, and I was living in a street close to the editor house of Peggy. And our hope is that with our land we can put into practice the same spirit that animated Peggy. The biblical verses of Peggy show how our day-to-day forms the biblical history. This dimension, the discovery of the Bible spaces, have become the movement of this winter in all Ukraine, not only in Kyiv, but also in other cities. There are two ways to read the Bible. The first one is not reading it. During the Soviet period, it was forbidden to publish the Bible. Nobody had the Bible at home. And I, for the first time, read the Bible in Czechoslovakia when I could get there. Probably in Italy as well, people don't read Bible every day. The other way is thinking to know something superficial and thinking about the Bible as some image that offers us. We're not gonna waste our time criticizing a superficial look towards the Bible. We better explain the paradox and the advantage of those who knew nothing about the Bible. Today, people know things about the Bible. Billy Kahn, a Bible expert, once said that he was talking to his American students about how Eve had taken the apple from the tree, how Eve ate it, and how she gave it to Adam, and the students were listening to this story with a great interest, and they were asking, but what happens next? How does it end? What does Adamo do with the apple? Adam do with the apple? Will he taste it? And what will happen to these two guys, to these two people. The students knew nothing about that book. But in that ignorance, there is one positive aspect, which is the following. The students were interested. They wanted to know something new about Adam and Eve. But let's leave aside the superiority of European students. Let's try to have a mental experiment. Let's imagine that we read for the first time some episodes of the Bible. For example, the Babel Tower, the language confusions. Let's imagine that we are listening to these stories for the first time and that we arrived at the moment of the Exodus from Egypt. We don't know anything of what comes next, and we don't know who David is and how his story is gonna end. So let's try to forget all those paintings that exist, those pictures of David that exist here in Italy. I know it's almost impossible, this, for Italian people, but let's try just for a minute that you never saw a painting of Caravaggio and you don't know how he painted David. If our meeting wasn't here, it would be easier. So we have to try to forget about Caravaggio. And this experiment can help us clarify my hypothesis. What moment of history right now is facing our continent? Allow me to explain to you my hypothesis through a short analogy. I will say openly and sincerely I will say that it is a drama that we don't know, a drama that we don't know how it is going to end. We don't know who will win between David and Goliath. We don't know anything. So let's have the protagonist of one of those ends, an outsider. We are talking about the young David. Who would be afraid of a duel, of a war, of a fight against a violent man such as Goliath? Imagine that you have your heart like frozen to the idea of seeing this little volunteer whose name is David. He is coming towards us. He doesn't have any helmet. He doesn't have any shield. And he is going to face Goliath, who was the terror of all the other soldiers. It is difficult for us seeing and understanding the tragedy of this scene and the terrible price that this strange volunteer David was going to pay. We try to stay away from the abyss towards which he is looking. I met people like that. I know their faces in Maidan. I knew them in Maidan. We usually hide behind the wall, and we know that there is a happy ending. But the Bible is not a quiz of questions and answers. There is no answer to the life and death of those who take part in the battle. Where is the Creator at the moment of the most dangerous situation? Which is the hand that can help a man when this person decides to go out and to offer and sacrifice his own life, and he wants to give his life for his own friends? Who is defending David? His friends, his family, not only them. David is defending hope. And we see that the strongest soldiers lower their hands without hope. And without hope, the strength of athletes is being destroyed. However, a weak volunteer can give a contribution that can change suddenly the battle. Moreover, it also gives a turning point during the battle. So, I repeat it once again, let's forget the happy ending. It's not difficult. We have to leave aside the drag that might be the happy ending. So right now we don't know what the crazy Goliath is going to do, if he's going to kill David or not. Let's forget their names. Let's forget everything we know about their history. And let's try to imagine this scene. On the one hand, we have this monster, this giant, armed. He is a winner. He always wins. And now he is coming towards me. And while he's coming towards me, I am hearing another voice. The voice of the man that today is taking the task of David. Well, the name of this man today is Francis. He is not a young boy as David. He is an old man, a man that doesn't hide behind a wall of indifference, even though he is surrounded by fear and also by lies. And this volunteer is coming out of the walls, and he goes across this fear path. And not only he calls other people, but he himself goes to the ends, and when he gets there, he raises his hands towards the sky so that we can look towards where he's indicating. In the sky, maybe there is a star. There is a point of view from which we can see all the surface of the earth, which is a periphery. The earth is one end. Now we can say we are in a dark night, but we also have the chance to see that our country and all the other countries are under the same skies with the stars. It is difficult to oppose to the fear of violence, which is represented by Goliath. The first book of the Kings tells us that all the Israelites, as they saw Goliath, they were going away because they were afraid. If you try to read the chapter 17 of the first book of the Kings, you will see some characteristics that we can find today as well. Many leaders of the world nowadays are afraid of the Goliath of our days. These evil giants of today are insulting the armies of the God. And today, what does Pope Francis want us to do? Let's try not to be afraid to follow him. For European people, the time has come to understand what was the end, the purpose of what Pope Francis told us. Don't be afraid. It's important to remember that it's the tip of the iceberg. This, don't be afraid. He wanted us to be against the society of the fear. Many didn't understand which were the machines of fear, of terror, and they thought it was something like normal. However, the old compromise has been destroyed this year, and I want to conclude by saying that when I've heard the Angelus last Sunday, when I've heard the Pope speaking, I thought that there are three meanings. It is clear. On August 24th is the Independence Day for Ukraine. Then a second sign of the people in our country. You see what the aggressors do to them, and then the realism of the gaze that recalls the humanity of all the continents, to understand that Ukraine today is going through a Via Crucis, and this is a plea for everybody, for those who believe and for those who not, of all religions. This is a call for every one of us, wherever we are, in every country. We have to answer to this call.
Lo rende come immagine che tutta la vita.
I hope that all the destiny is in the hands of mystery. I hope that this can be mystery. After celebrating the first week and then the following weeks of the Maidan, you say that we do not know what Goliath will do. We are going through a dark night. But I didn't sense a sense of defeat. I didn't give up. On the other hand, on the contrary, I did something else. I was touched from what our friend Filonico was talking about, vulnerability. The vulnerability of the eye, not as a deficit, but as a gift, as a resource that we can grasp, because we realize that the mystery that governs the history can be present, can be concrete. So I would like to ask you something. You were talking about the first glorious week. You compared it to the week of the meeting. Then we're going back home on Saturday. And you had, on the other hand, you had many other weeks, not just 1 week. And things got more difficult. So while we keep working on this week, while you keep working on this week, what did support you? What supported this hope you were talking about? Why this hope wasn't a dream? Why wasn't it a kind of convincing yourself that there was a hope? So what's the reality? What's this hope about? Can you please tell us more about it?
На Майдане мы встретили людей.
We met many people in Maidan, many people that went through this fear of death. They went to Maidan. In the Gospel, it means giving your life for your own friends. There is another episode in the Bible that talks about time, the time in this spring, the time when history asks us to put up with problems. Which arguments can touch the head of stone of the pharaohs? Almost we do not feel the voice of hope and a happy ending. It is difficult. You can feel people complaining, people crying, people dying. And this is a sort of cry that is not just doesn't come from one area, it comes from everywhere, because everybody cries. Fathers, sons, mothers, friends, anybody cries because of death. Because of the death because they cry for somebody that died for them, somebody that gave them his life. Any propaganda can, with its voice, delete this cry, but those voices are impossible to be eliminated. They cannot be eliminated by propaganda. So we need to keep giving ourselves. We need to look at ourselves. We need to transmit among us through gestures, through looks, we need to transmit this hope that there is an end, there is a solution to this. So this work is being done by volunteers and by the representatives of every single church that help hundreds of thousands of refugees and people who went to Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, and in Kiev and in Ukraine. In all Ukraine. So this will keep being something alive in the future as well. And we hope that this work will link the movement, will link people in the movement. It was like a sort of impossible thing at the beginning, but then we could experience an interaction among people. It was a sort of reminding of the cross of Christ. So let us talk about our history, our present, not about the Bible. And I think that March brought us a terrible news. The old compromise was destroyed this year. The annexion of Crimea deleted the principle of non-violation of barriers. after the Second World War, those relationships between Europe and the world were built it, but then there was dictatorship regimes, and in Russia and Kazakhstan, yeah, and they talk about hatred towards the Western world. Those countries propose an Eurasian project. They cannot accept the refusal of Ukraine, to be united in this project against European countries. And the aggression against Ukraine is just a single step to frighten any country, Polonia and Italy. So Putin really wants a revenge. He wants us to be afraid. On the other hand, Bible and Gospels tell us not to be afraid. So he's really trying to destroy the links of trust, and he spreads everywhere hatred. So this is basically a policy, of the stick and the carrot. It is the refusal of the very deep truths of the gospel. It is the hypocrisy that created a sort of anti-clericalism in the Soviet area, because we have never experienced it before. So it is a sort of illusion of Putinism. Putin is the one that fights for the traditional values, but it is just an illusion. We have to eliminate this illusion, even among Catholics, the right-winged Catholics in the Western countries.
Tu hai parlato del momento che state vivendo come un'autentica via crucis, una croce e un calvario. E questo evidentemente che condividono la fede cristiana un sacrificio in un contesto che sembra più grande di noi, sembra più e meglio attrezzato delle forze che un cristiano può mettere in campo.
I'd like to ask you, according to your experience this year, which is the contribution that you think you can give as an Orthodox? What's the contribution that those volunteers can do? What's the original contribution you think you can give? You think that you are giving to this crossing a bridge of fear? This is an expression that you used to quote Pope Francis in order to go to the ends of the world. What's the original contribution that being Christians can give to this situation, to such a dramatic and difficult situation every single day? This situation that is more and more dramatic every single day.
Говорит о ключ.
Our experience talks about the important meaning of overcoming the distance, the gap among different generations. The solidarity between generations is important in order to get the society free. Let's look at two different ways of living. For example, on the one hand, there are those who are sort of false politicians, people who live according to rules, to law, people who just think how to live while they are elected, and they try to do their own business and to spread terror. They keep us like in boxes. They make us live in the present, not the future. It is the alternative of the biblical vision of the time. For us today, the sense of life it has tradition. Just think of disciples, all those protectors and the patrons of Europe that we can remind, Benedetto, Cirillo and Metodio. This is our life, and we really know we wouldn't be so intelligent, so alive, so confident about ourselves if we wouldn't have sons and daughters that share our ideas. And I experienced it thanks to my children and thanks to the experience in Maidan. That's why we are really sure that it is really clear that future is linked to our solidarity. It is linked to the solidarity of the generations that I know, that I see today. And by overcoming that fear, by overcoming the destruction of the hope, we lost many false hopes about the end of history, the victory of democracy, of economy, without a contribution by us, without committing, without any effort. But what is the idea of politics that we have? There is the politician that comes to visit many meetings. Then first he goes to Christians, then he goes to other associations where they do not talk about Christians, and then he goes to another show, another meeting, and so on and so forth. But what's the reason why he does so? Well, he passes from his duties to power. Is there in Europe an alternative to this attitude? Is there another way to stay together and to do meetings, to sit together after a huge public meeting? Thousands of people that had the opportunity to hear about our discussion with all the people who came us tonight, have the people to keep working and keep talking tete-a-tete among men, maybe just among a couple of people, but we have the opportunity to talk together, to stay together, and new meetings can be linked to friendship that pass through a test that link us every year. That's how many experiences were born. Experiences such as summer meetings in Kiev. And this year we didn't start with liberation. We start with communion, because just through communion we can walk together towards freedom, towards liberation. And we know that we can even meet our friends in despair, in disgrace. So the end, the objective, all those experiences can build projects that are concrete in our society. So working on concrete tasks is positive, but we are working on the possibility to meet together in a period that is not characterized by war. In this moment, it is important to answer to this challenge, and this is why we meet together here. In Kiev, people know about the meeting that we're carrying out today and this week, and Ukraine. People are really grateful, are really happy about what we're doing today, now. I'd like just to ask you something else, last question. You just talk about this meeting, this summer course that you organized this summer. And you said that you're talking about something else that is not taken for granted, because you're not talking about liberation, you're talking about something else. In fact, you're talking about communion in this summer course. Well, I'd like to tell you just a couple of things. I tell those who know about happy ending to forget it. But in the end of 1967 and 1968, a young person made a group of people from universities, and all of a sudden a sort of revolution, a sort of Maidan breaks out, and many young people leave the movement and go to this new group that promises revolution, promises a change of social structures as miracles, as a sudden miracle produced by its own efforts. And this young person, this young priest that is almost alone, with just a couple of friends around him, has something very clear, and he says it, he tells it. He says that we can make a change in society, but just to one condition. If we accept that there cannot be a revolution of the society, of the world, of habits, without a deep revolution in of ourselves. So revolution of ourselves. So we have to recognize the deep nature, the mysterious nature of the human need. This is not about a change of structures. It's about changing ourselves. It is a hope that allows us to tell something else that strikes us, that shivers us, that gives us shivers. So we need to be conscious. We need to acknowledge it first. We need to acknowledge what deeply changed our heart. And if God wants, it can also be transmitted. It can also affect hundreds of thousands of people. All those flames that illuminated that square, filmed by the drone. So it is a happy ending, because a group of students in the University of Milan were friends of that priest whose name was Luigi Giussani. And those people show a flyer at the university that has a title that reminds exactly the two words that you used at the end of your speech. The title is Communion and Liberation. And they say, just as you said, we want liberation. We want to get out of fear. We want to cross that bridge. It wouldn't be possible without our own strength, but we discovered that this freedom, this liberation, is not by ourselves. It is a possibility that is given by the mystery, by the ocean of the mystery. Because this mystery can be a friend of us. This mystery does not leave us alone. And the way this company has is communion. It is the hope that we have for you, for this adventure. We do not know the end of this adventure, but nobody knows the end of any single day of any adventure. But we know that as Caron said in May in St. Petersburg, well, he talked about a big ocean. There is I noted a sentence that is a sort of literal comment to the title of this meeting. The meeting says, the destiny didn't let the man alone. And Caron said, what did the mystery do among us? The mystery hasn't left the man alone. What did this mystery do? Well, this did the Christian community. We have hope. And the only answer is a Christian community. There is no other answer. It looks like something. It is a weird thing. It looks like a fragile thing. But this is the beginning of that hope, of that simple hope that supports the young David in front of the big Goliath. This is the first contribution to change, in order to change our world. So here comes the last question, and you can answer as you like. Anyway, Giussani says that every man has to realize that he or she is growing. After the first week in Maidan, where you and your children were among all that volunteer people, all the volunteers, well, how did your life change? How did you change? Can you please tell us something about yourself, or an occasion when you feel that you were changed, or you grew? Can you please tell us about it? Can you please tell us how the enemies, how difficulties cannot be your enemies? You already told us something, but if you had to add something from 2013, how did I change, or how did that episode become occasion for me to change and to grow up?
This is just the beginning. You thought that it was the end already, but it's just the beginning. The beginning for me, and I must say that this is connected to a strong sense of guilt, shame. You know how brief is human memory? Every one of us study foreign languages, and then they forget them, they forget about foreign words. I forgot many of the things that I listened a couple of years ago at a conference about Europe, and now I remember with shame that I didn't pay attention to problems of people that came from countries where there were problems and difficulties, And this entitles you, let's say, to just not pay enough attention to what I'm saying. But this winter, I started to meet people, and together we started to pay attention to the lives of unlucky men. And these men awake our conscience and remember concrete moments when I listen to people I care with less care. They taught me a lot. And what can overcome time? Well, that's gratitude. The fact that the people that fought for our freedom in Kiev and that are still fighting, we need to be grateful and thankful towards them. I'm not entitled to talk about this here yet. One last thing that I want to say today is that I know one thing. I know the extraordinary care and attention with which you in Italy listened to what happened in Ukraine. I will never forget that. Thank you for what you said tonight, because it comes from a man that accepted and keeps accepting the challenge that came from that mystery about which we know nothing. We just know what the mystery itself wants to tell us. It's a totally positive challenge, and it's a challenge for every one of us. So this is why after tonight we feel closer to you in your path. So we wish that you will never lose the attention and the care to the people and the things that you talk about tonight, because we wish we could have that care and that attention. I hope that we will be able to keep walking together, sharing situations, because we're all facing challenges, because they affect the deep of our hearts. A reason to die or live. It's a very impressive thing that just one man said in history that there is no greater love than the love of that person that dies for his friends. And it should be you, Lord, the real friend, because there is no doubt that a lot of that those flames in Maidan are giving their life for their friends, and the greatest thing that we can do is pointing the name of that mysterious friend without which it's not worth living. Thank you.